Brought to you by TorahAnytime.com. Tzorayim Tov. Today is class number 71 in our series of Zionism and its relationship to Judaism. And last time we met, we discussed a kuntras from Rav Aviner, who discusses the ways to justify the state of the creation of the state, even though it appears to violate the three oaths. So we already discussed the first reason that he gave. And now we're going to explain a few more reasons that he gives. Hopefully we'll finish up this topic today, or at worst, not tomorrow. There's no class tomorrow, and on Wednesday. And we are on page 607 in the book. It'd be a little easier to follow. I bought a number of copies. I can still buy another one or two. And at the end, you guys could keep it, so use it as a reference. So one of the, remember the oaths, there were three oaths. There were three oaths. What was the third oath? The third oath is the non-Jews should not make the Jews suffer too much. So Rav Aviner says, well, since the non-Jews violated their oath, because they've hurt us so much, so therefore we're absolved from keeping our oath. It's like a reciprocal deal. They got an oath, we have two oaths, they don't keep their oath, we don't have to keep our oaths. Now, Rav Hemkin, Zichron Livracha, says this was the main excuse Zionists use for violating the oaths. As you can see in the middle of the page, at the time there emerged a movement to establish a Jewish country with the excuse that the nations overdid the Golus and subordination of the Jews, so that they had violated their oath. And therefore, according to the opinion of the establishers of the government, the prohibition of the oaths was nullified. But, says Rav Henkin, the majority of the Gedolei Hador did not agree with that. So now the author is going to explain why we did not agree with them. First of all, whoever said that the oaths are reciprocal? It was not this idea of making a deal, if you do this, we'll do that. Nowhere does it say that, right? And the oath that Hashem gave us, not to rebel at the Goyim, you have to think about it. What was the purpose of that oath? You think it was, well, let's not rebel against the Goyim, and the Goyim shouldn't overdo it to us. So it's like, we have two sides of a deal. We shouldn't rebel against the Goyim because they won't like it. And therefore, if we're going to do what the Goyim are happy with, then they'll do what we're happy with and they won't do it with us. That's not how it works. The oath not to rebel at the Goyim was not for the sake of the non-Jews, but for our own sake, to protect us by ensuring that we don't end the Golus too early. So it's not reciprocal oaths over here. Just because the non-Jews violate their oath, which isn't good for them, well, why should we violate our oath, which isn't good for us? And therefore, as Rav Shach writes, from this we can understand that when Chazal said we're prohibited to rebel against the nations and to ascend like a wall, they sought only the welfare of our people. Now, if you look in the back of the book, there's an appendix for a full letter of what Rav Shach writes. I don't think we're going to read the full letter, but certainly it's something to be interested. Page 1385 in the back, there are two letters from Rav Shach, and I'm not going to do the whole thing. He goes through a whole introduction showing how the Jewish people are not like other nations. The way we survive is not the way other nations survive. Okay? And if you look on page 1386, he talks about the dangers of assimilation. So you look in the second paragraph on 1386, this is Rav Shach Zichron Livracha. He said, we did not become assimilated thanks to to marry their daughters. In other words, why did we not assimilate? Because the rabbis gave us guidance to stay away from them. And our eyes have seen that in countries where close adherence to Torah and rabbinic law broke down, the Jews became assimilated. And in those places, there's no longer allegiance to our religion or our nation. From this, we should realize that in the same fashion, when our sages forbade us to rebel against the Gentiles, warning us not to end our exile on our own, it was only for our good. For by their Ruach HaKodesh, meaning the rabbis in the Talmud, they saw that the hatred of the Gentiles for the Jewish nation is everlasting and fixed in their hearts. And we must not provoke them even when we are right and they are wrong, because provoking them will only increase their hatred of us. And do not think that the Holocaust that we suffered was because we did not have a state of our own. It was not that at all. Having a state does not guarantee our survival. And even if here, he's referring to the modern state of Israel, even here, if here there were 5 million of us, still, God forbid, a war were to break out between the major world powers, what good would such numbers be to us in light of today's methods of warfare?
That was back then.
And even if I don't have that exactly. Well, he passed away around the year 2000, so I don't have that.
Even more the case now.
Yes, it's many years ago. Okay. He continues, and even if we too were strong, what good would it do us against a major world power? And during the years of the Second World War, when the Germans had reached El Alamein and stood ready to enter Eretz Yisrael, even had there been 5 million Jews there, the destruction would have been very great, worse than elsewhere, because here there were no forests where partisans could hide. On one side of us was the sea, all around us were enemies that hated us, and only the hand of Hashem caused the Germans to change their minds and go attack Russia. And Hashem did so in order to save the small remnant of our people in Eretz Yisrael. I refer you back to other stories that explain the miracle of El Alamein. Remember, Rommel never lost the battle till El Alamein, and after El Alamein, he never won a battle afterwards. And there was a lot of tefillos that were going on in Eretz Yisrael prior to that battle. Continues Rav Shach, therefore I think it is advisable to be careful not to speak haughtily, and in my opinion not to obstinate about continuing to build settlements. He's against the building of settlements. Because we all know that foregoing things exclusively for the sake of peace is not really giving up anything. And when Hashem shows mercy upon us and the time of redemption arrives, we will get everything back anyway. I have no hesitation in saying that according to halacha, there's nothing to hold us back from giving up a part of Eretz Yisrael for the sake of peace. In addition, history shows that we suffered more from the countries in Europe than we suffered from Arab countries. So Rav Shach's opinion, now some of you may not be happy, but this is Das Torah. You know, it says, it's the land of Eretz Yisrael, but Jewish life takes precedence over this, especially understand we should not be going against the oaths.
Because some people will claim that, right? Some people will say you can't give up any of it.
I understand that, but this is Rav Shach's opinion.
I'm just saying this is...
Okay? But the main point we're reading this is because we said the oaths are for our benefit. That's why I'm reading. But I decided to write all this to Your Honor. It's a letter in response, because I have the impression that Your Honor is overly influenced by the thinking of those who do not sufficiently penetrate to the depth of these matters as to their seriousness, and neither do they speak about them with sufficient responsibility. Since these people are concerned about Your Honor's welfare, Your Honor is influenced by them. I hope, though, that in terms of practice you do not accept their view. Also, I'd like to bring to your honor's attention that regarding these matters, one should not be influenced by well-known personalities whose views are not based on the unchanging eternal halacha and the Torah perspective that has been passed down to us from one generation to another. Of course, it is difficult to forgo and step back when such goes against one's feelings, and all the more so when it goes against religious feelings. But when human life is at stake, a responsible person's obligation is to lift himself above emotions and direct his actions exclusively according to straight thinking, which is based upon the Torah's way of thinking. Okay, so side point, you see that Rav Shach was very much against settling more places in Eretz Yisrael, let's put it this way, of not giving them up.
Right.
If you have it, it's one thing, but to give it up for peace, again, we are going against the oaths, so why would we want to do this? Especially the oaths are for our benefit. So this is the first refutation of, since they didn't keep the oaths, we don't have to keep the oaths. The oaths are for our benefit, number one.
Rav Shach is very
Panovich Yeshiva. He was the Gadol Hador in the late 20th century. Since the Stipler passed away for sure, or really since the Chazon Ish. I mean, he was a big, big rabbi. He was the head. Now, he says another thing. He says, and this idea that it's not reciprocal, he says, if you just look at the Sfarim, you see this is not true. Let's have a few examples. The tribe of Ephraim left Egypt early, and that was a violation of the oaths. Now, Egypt surely violated their oath when they tortured Jews for centuries. Yet Chazal say that Shevet Ephraim was killed in the desert because they violated the oath. That's a clear proof that even though the non-Jews, it was pretty bad being in Egypt, when you say they did more than Hashem asked them to do, so to speak. And still you couldn't leave before the time. And the oaths are brought down in halacha, in halacha sforim, in rishonim and achronim, as viable and very real. And certainly these rishonim lived in a time when the non-Jews were very bad to us, and they still said the oaths are in effect. Okay, he quotes the Rambam in Igeres HaTshuva. He warns that Jews should not violate the oaths or risk a horrible punishment. And he writes that the Jews are suffering an evil, persecuting government that commits atrocities and wars against the Jews, and the Jews should be careful not to violate the oath by rebelling against them. So Rambam clearly says, even though the non-Jews are violating their oath, we don't violate ours. Don't you think the Romans violated the oath? Yet the generation of Bar Kokhba was punished, says Chazal, because they violated the oaths. We brought that medrash long ago. Even though people are so, wow, it gave us a lot of Jewish pride to have Bar Kokhba, but the problem is he went against the oaths, and that was a bloodbath in Beitar. The Maharal writes that even if the Goyim force us with a torturous death to violate the oath, we should rather submit to death than violate the oath. The Gemara itself disproves the idea, since Gemara says the reason the rabbis commanded us not to go from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael was due to the oaths, even though Bavel certainly violated their oath with the atrocities they did when destroying the Beis Hamikdash. We couldn't go before the time. He brings from Rav Aram Galanti a story of the Jews in Portugal who wanted to defend themselves against the government by making a rebellion. And then the government was engaged in forcing Jews to convert, all kinds of terrible persecutions. So there's a mystic over here. They used the Shem HaMeforesh, Hashem's special name, and to mystically get an answer from Hashem. And the answer was, don't. It will violate the oaths. Okay? And besides this, the second oath, that we should not come up like a wall, has nothing to do with Goyim and doesn't depend on the Goyim's oath anyway. As Rav Yonasan Eivish says, even if the Goyim give us permission to go, we're not allowed to go. He says, better we should die in Eretz Yisrael than take Eretz Yisrael, as the Maharal says. So really, this is not a complicated issue. Anyone who learns about the oath, therefore, is realizing, yes, of course the Goyim violated. Since when has they had a reason for us to violate it? So that's a knockout to that reason. Now he goes to reason number 11, and this is based on a Megillas Esther commentary, not the book of Esther, but the commentary of Megillas Esther, where the Rambam omits the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. He says it's not a mitzvah. Ramban disagreed with it. Megillas Esther wanted to answer the question of the Ramban on the Rambam and wanted to suggest the following reason. Even though the Rambam, Maimonides, seemed to say there's no mitzvah. And he says, well, Megillah says, you know why the Rambam says it? Because you're not allowed to go against the government. Okay, so then he says, well, and that's wrong. Okay, so again, that that's one thing of maybe saying he's wrong, because maybe remember we said it's a distinction. If you want to go by yourself as a private person, you could do this. So the Megillas Esther was trying to explain why the Rambam said you couldn't even go by yourself. So to go by yourself and to say it's violating the oath, maybe Megillas Esther was wrong on that. But that doesn't change the fact that the Rambam held it was not a mitzvah. And the Megillas Esther doesn't say the oath is there and therefore you can't go. He maybe mistakenly applied it to individuals, saying because the oath, individuals couldn't go. But that's not... So you can say that's not true. Individuals could go. It's not violating the oath. But the fact that even if the Megillas Esther is wrong, and maybe he is wrong, but en masse, that still applies. So therefore, that's one of the big ones they say. Well, the whole reason Megillas Esther offends the Rambam is no mitzvah Eretz Yisrael because of the oaths. Okay, the oaths may not apply to individuals going, but a nation to go certainly would violate that. And the Rambam was only talking about the mitzvah of individuals going. Another one is that the oaths are from the type of Gemara that's called Agadita. There's two types of Gemara. Gemara that's speaking halacha, laws, and then you got like kind of stories, mystical stuff, that we don't base rulings based on mystical things. So this is really a very bizarre claim, because the rabbis have invoked the oaths in halacha over the generations. And the Gemara uses it in actual practice. And it says when Jews violate the oath, the Gemara says it right there, it will bring terrible consequences. So I can't imagine that's just agadita, that's just like tales, so to speak. Okay, there's no opinion that holds that the oath should be ignored. He brings from Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher, who invokes them. Similarly, Rabbi Reines of the Mizrahi party himself said there was such an oath. And of course, like all Torah principles, the oaths have their own rules when they apply, but just to dismiss them as it's a gadata really is a very poor response to that. Okay, and now to be able to sacrifice the safety of the Jewish people is really ignoring the secret of the survival of the Jewish people in the Golus. The fact that we kept the oaths, that's kept the Jewish people going on. Okay? When you violate it and to ignore it, that means you're looking for destruction. Now, of course, the Zionists do not believe in Torah, do not believe in God, do not believe in the Talmud, so they don't care about the oaths. But halachic people, like religious Zionists, should be interested in the halacha. And, the Rambam says the oaths are binding. The poskim say the oaths are binding. And even Hashem says the oaths are binding, because that's why the tribe of Ephraim died. Bar Kochva, Beitar, Tisha B'Av, we're going to worry about this because the Gemara says they violated the oaths. So how could you say the oaths are not binding maybe someone should tell Hashem they're not binding. At least if you'd let Hashem know they're not binding, then maybe he wouldn't be doing the things that he's doing. And the oaths are cited lehalocha in so many sources, and he just quotes a slew of them, and he says that's not all of them. The Piskariyaz, the response of the Rivash, the Rashbash, the Sefer Mitzvahs of the Rambam, the Ramban, Rambam, Igeres Teman, Maral, etc., all say the oaths are still around. So how can you say that this is just a gadata and nobody really takes it seriously? And there's many, many more. Even Chacham Ovadia Yosef said. Okay? And besides all that, Rabbeinu Tam, one of the Balei also says, you do paskin from a gadata unless it goes against halacha. So you even can paskin like a gadata. And the Pri Chodesh rules that way as well. So the Gemara uses this principle as a halacha, and there's no dissenting opinion in the Gemara. The Rishonim and the Achronim quote it as practical law, and the Torah tells us that people have been punished for violating it. So now the Zionists are saying it's not binding on anyone? Okay. Now, and number 4, even if you want to say, although we can't say this already, but even if you want to say the oaths do not create a halacha or not, but this is a reality that the Gemara says will happen. So even when I say, well, you know what? It's not really a halacha, it's just a piece of advice. Okay, so why would you be a fool to not take that piece of advice? Is historically has shown that you get terrible results. So why would you not go with this? And that's really leading us into the last one we're going to discuss today, reason number 13, that says the oaths are decrees and not prohibitions. It's based on a mistaken understanding of the Maharal. The Maharal, after he quotes the oaths, as well as the consequences for violating them, again, the Pasuk says, I will allow your flesh to be hunted down in the fields like game and cattle. Does that sound like October 7th? Yeah. He explains the reason for the oaths. He said that since Golus is an unnatural state, Jews should not be in Golus. And all unnatural states have natural resistance. People don't want to be in an unnatural state. So, therefore, in order to protect the integrity of the Golus, Hashem made the oaths. So the Maharal refers to the oaths besides as zeros, but he mentions them as also, and he states they're oaths, that is decrees. Okay? So Rav Aviner claims that since the Maharal refers to the oaths as decrees, that means they're not binding on us. Just like Hashem, in other words, Hashem decrees a punishment. So Hashem decrees a punishment. There's no halacha that's binding us. He mistakenly said it's a decree from God that says we're punished that we can't do this. That's not what the Maharal meant. The Maharal says just like you have a rabbinic decree. What does a rabbinic decree mean? That the rabbis are punishing us? A rabbinic decree is a fence not to violate something that is there. You know, for example, the Maharal, let's see over here. Let's say Maharal says in Erchin, he says, know that saras is fitting for those who distance themselves from reality, and therefore the Torah was gozer on him, decreed that he should sit alone separate from the community. So what does that mean? That's not just a reality, that's a halacha. Right? So when the Maharal says that the oaths are gzeros, right, is that the oaths are self-made by Hashem, so to say. So it has nothing to do with the laws of nature as opposed to halachic obligation. And that's what it is. It is a halachic obligation. Okay. And it's not just natural laws. Because again, you see, all the poskim keep ruling on this. You can't do this, you can't do that, because that is the gzera, and means God says, I don't want you to do it, and if you're going to do it, you're going to be hunted down like animals in the field. Okay? And after all that, the Maral himself says, even if the nations want to kill the Jews with torture, we can still violate the oaths. So how are you going to say that's just a natural reality? No, these are halachas. So it comes out clearly, number one, it is possible to violate the oaths. But if we do, you could violate the oaths. You have free will choice to violate the oaths. But if you do that, that's going to cause mass destruction. And God is warning us not to violate the oaths, even under torturous death, as the Maral says. So, where are you telling me that this is not a thing that applies anywhere? Okay, and the last point, the Brisker Rav says an amazing idea. The Brisker Rav says that not only are the punishments of the oaths real, but also he said it's all based in Psukim and Shir Hashirim. So Shir Hashirim wasn't only saying you can't violate the oaths. Shir Hashirim was predicting that Jews would violate the oaths. Why? He derived it from one of the texts. The first two oaths warned the Jews not to arouse, not to awaken. That means don't do it. But the third oath, it says like this, why do you arouse and why do you awaken? Which means there's going to come a time when people are descendants of the Jews will want to violate the time, and they'll establish a government with physical strength before the coming of the Mashiach. So the first part of the prophecy tells us that the act is prohibited. And the second by saying, if you will awaken. But regarding the situation subsequent to the founding of the state, the question now is, why did you awaken? And after you see that your actions didn't benefit you at all, why have you awakened it for that? So now so the author asked a relative of the Brisker Rav, did he specifically refer to the state of Israel? He said, I wasn't specifically referring to the state of Israel, but he was speaking about this concept in general.
Awakening the anger.
Or awakening the anger. So therefore, there's a lot more to talk about, but that's enough on this topic. The oaths, there's clearly a lot of halachic weight that says the oaths are still in effect, even after the state has been created, and therefore every day the oaths are being violated. Now the question is, how do you deal with it? That's another story. But they are being violated, and to what extent is you have to follow this? Now, I just also want to add one thing, since I have a few extra minutes. I didn't want to leave a misunderstanding between Satmar and the Torah Karta, because a lot of people making some mistakes, and I understand there's a video going around of these the Torah Karta people who are very pro-Iran and saying the state of Israel is terrible and this and that. Just want to make it clear that when there was a discussion if there'll be a state, should we recognize the state or not? We're going to talk about this much more in much more detail much further on in the book. But the Haredi world had to decide what's going to happen if there is a state. How do we deal with it? So, Agudas Yisrael's general opinion. Now, before it came into being, all the real Haredi party says we shouldn't have a state, we shouldn't try to make a state, because that violates the oath, we shouldn't have anything to do with it. But then as they see it could be a real reality, how do we respond? So the Agudas Yisrael's response was, if it's going to be, we can't stop it, so we might as well at least try to enable religious Jews to live, to manage to live in the country and not be subject to laws that will destroy the religious Jews. If the country makes laws to destroy...
It's a desecration of the land.
Right. So, but more than that, the Jew can't even live there. So if he can get into politics to make sure we can at least live there, it doesn't mean we agree with the state, because there's going to be people running the country anyway. At least try to run it that we are able to live as religious Jews. That was their general position. The Satmarov, on the other hand, said no. It's something we should not join at all. We should have nothing to do with it for many reasons, but he did not recognize the state at all. Doesn't mean to say we don't daven for them, but they are not the spokesman of the Jewish people. Regardless, what you can live in Eretz Yisrael. Satmarov, you can live in Eretz Yisrael, but you can't. We don't recognize the state. Now, there was a group of people called the Natura Karta, was founded in 1938 by Rav Amram Blau, who had similar positions that we cannot allow the state to be desecrated. They don't recognize the state, and the land to be desecrated. And however, he was mamish l'shem shemaim, but then unfortunately evolved a outlier group of people who have picked up this Natura Karta and gone to the extreme. And going to the extreme means that you now start speaking and helping and abetting the enemies of the Jews. All right, so in other words, and now you're going to cause harm to the Jewish people. Now again, Satmar would protest against the government. They would protest if the government did things that were not good, let's say, autopsies or things like that, or want to get women to go in the army, and halachic issues, they would protest. They say this is not proper, and we don't, you're not our spokesman. But not to harm the state of Israel. There's nothing to harm, to speak against it. So, and the original Natura Karta also felt that way. But unfortunately, it's gotten out of hand, and it's have a very small group of people, maybe a couple hundred. Yeah. The problem is they dress like Hasidim, and everybody makes it seem this is the Hasidic position, and they get in videos, and they make all these things, and then people look and say, oh, you see, religious Jews say that the Palestinians should wipe us out, or get rid. Well, they don't say should wipe us out. They're saying we should just give up the country and let the Palestinians rule, which would mean they would destroy us. Now again, right now, we're not much in a position of what to do in terms of that. That's another issue. I just want to clarify that when you hear Natura Karta today, that is nothing of what it was 85 years ago. And has nothing to do with Satmar. And the Satmarov many times spoke against the Natura Karta, and even the present Satmarov has spoken very negatively against the Natura Karta. There are Jews there, and we have to take care of the Jews, we have to love the Jews. Yes, definitely against the government. They don't recognize the government as the government in charge, but you still, they are Jews, and you have to protect the Jews that live there. So they're very much against. So when you hear Natura Karta now, that is nothing of what we're interested in. To Wednesday, we now get to a very hard, cognitive dissonance concept of the Israel wars. Are they myths or miracles? And that's going to be a very hard topic to digest. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.